All right, now let's talk a little bit about the difference between commands, queries, and events. You can see they're each different types of messages, and you may be familiar with commands and queries because you've heard the term CQRS, which stands for Command, Query, Responsibility, Segregation. Now, it is helpful in your designs many times to separate your commands from your queries because they have typically different ways that they interact with your system. For instance, commands typically will mutate the system, whereas queries are read-only and should just return data. Now, if you look at how these messages interact with other parts of the system, you have a command sent from one system to another, and that's it. There's no response typically, right? Sometimes if you're using database generated keys, you might need to wait for a key to come back so that you know what the ID is of something you just created. But generally, commands should just be fire and forget. Just put it on a queue and forget about it, and something eventually will do that work. And you don't have to have any type of result coming back from it, right? If there's some type of error that occurs, there's some other process that'll compensate for that you don't have to worry about. Now we have queries. A query is going to send a message to another part of the system and ask it a question and wait until it gets a response. So it is waiting for something to come back from the thing that it's querying, right? And so queries are always going to wait for that response. Then you have events, and events are different because they're kind of like a command in that they're not waiting for anything to come back, but they're actually possibly one-to-many. They could even be zero, right? So you could have something that's firing off events and nothing is listening to it. Or there could be one, or there could be 25, or whoever knows, different things that are handling that event. And so the main difference with events is the one-to-many or even zero-to-many nature of them, where you can be firing events and it doesn't really matter if you have listeners or not. Basically, all of the messages in your system can be broken down into one of these three things typically. And so it's useful for you to understand how these each interact with their dependencies. The other thing to consider when you're talking about different modules, whether you're talking about microservices or a modular monolith, is who owns the contract for each of these messages, right? So which side of this relationship, the caller or the handler, should be the one that is determining what the command looks like, what that schema, what that DTO, what that message looks like? Well, it has to be the thing that's going to actually respond to the command because it's the thing that needs to understand what's being given to it. And it's possible that that one handler could be receiving commands from more than one different sender, right? You may not be the only module that's making these commands and calling out to this other module. There may be many others doing so as well. Same thing with a query, right? When you have a query to some handler, right? The handler is the thing that defines what that query looks like, what the properties are on that message. And so in both of these cases, the one on the right, the handler, is responsible for controlling that message and its format. So if you're going to put this handler in a module, you need to put all of the details of the command and the response, if there is any, inside of that module. For events, it's flipped. When you have something that is raising events, the thing that is responsible for what that event looks like is the thing that is dispatching the event, the thing that is sending the event. So on the left is the thing that is going to own that contract and that schema of what that message looks like, and will be the one that has that in its contract's public-facing project in its module. All the different handlers could live in the same module, they could be in different modules, but they don't get to decide what that event looks like or what details it contains. That's going to be up to the thing that is actually dispatching those events.